Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to Unsiloed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here today with Shigehiro Oishi, who is a professor of psychology at the University of Chicago and also the author of this new book called Life in Three Dimensions: How Curiosity, Exploration, and Experience Make a Fuller, Better Life. Welcome, Shige.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this whole discipline of, what is it? Happiness studies, subjective well-being studies, right?
Well-being research, I don't know. Yeah.
Positive psychology. I mean, there's a lot of different terms for it. And it's, it's been around for a while. And I kind of think of it as an economist as an extension of, it's kind of welfare economics in a way, right? Trying to figure out how to, maximize the well-being of individuals and the world. And I think, economists have always had this very simplistic view where they want to reduce subjective well-being to a single dimension, right? A single metric. And sometimes they use the term utility, but sometimes they talk about happiness, right? And it's even baked into our founding documents, right?
Sure.
And so, over the years in the field, I think the analysis has become a little more complex as we've started to see that there are multiple strands of well-being. And sometimes there are trade-offs across them. By increasing one dimension, you might actually reduce the other. So I was wondering if you could just tell us briefly, like, how has this field evolved? I mean, you studied with some of the pioneers. How has this evolved, and how has it begun to splinter into happiness and meaning? And now, right, this new third dimension that you described.
Sure. I mean, when I started my graduate school at University of Illinois, working with that Dina, we would read, Jeremy Bentham, of course, and Richard E. Sterling, and all, basic utilitarian thinking, as well as some of the pioneering, economists' work on happiness. And in psychology, I think at least Edina in 1984 sort of tried to avoid the term happiness, actually, because the term happy or happiness could be sort of misleading. Some people may think about just a happy feeling, whereas, scientifically, we are talking about good life as a whole. So, it's more like, are you happy about your life, the way, your life is going? So in a technical term, probably life satisfactions or something like that captures that, how one feels about the life as a whole. So Edina used the term subjective well-being. So it is about the well-being, whether you think you're being well or not. But instead of sort of more philosophical, objective view of the well-being, he wanted to really put that to the hands of the people, whether people actually feel that their life is going well. So he used the term subjective well-being. And then he really defined it as essentially three components. One is the cognitive component of life satisfaction or life evaluation. Another component is the positive emotions, the frequency of positive emotion. Do you feel happy? Do you feel joy? Do you feel contentment? Do you feel pride in your daily life? And then the third component is the relative lack of negative emotions. So you're not feeling so sad or angry or depressed so much. So with the three components, he thought subjective well-being really captures. But then 1980, so that was 1984. 5 years later already, Carol Riff, very prominent psychologist at the University of Wisconsin, said, the interesting title says, happiness is everything, or is it? And essentially she said, subjective well-being is too focused on the subjective feeling of happiness, and we should be looking at more function, whether somebody is functioning well. So maybe, Hitler was feeling great about killing all the people and just invading other countries. But obviously, he wasn't leading a, objectively speaking, good life. So she wanted to put more of the functioning part of it. And then she has this 6-dimensional model of psychological well-being, consisting of autonomy, environmental masteries, and personal growth, and so forth. So ever since then, there is the debate between sort of more hedonic dimension of well-being versus so-called eudaimonic well-being. And of course, Aristotle used the term eudaimonia, and the eudaimonia consists of you, good, and daemon, so spirit, good spirit on your side. So originally, it's more like a good luck and fortune. And indeed, most of the, around the world, if you ask, what is the term for happiness in your own country? Turkish, Norwegian, Japanese, and so forth. And then ask the dictionary definitions. And then we did this, back in 2013. We got data from 30 countries. And 24 out of 30 countries essentially said happiness is good luck and fortune. And then 6 countries didn't, and US included. So in the US, of course, when we look at the Webster Unabridged Dictionary in the 1800s, primary definition of happiness is actually indeed good luck and fortune. But I sent my research assistant to, Virginia's library, and they had to look it up from, 1821, and etc. And then something happened in 1961 edition. It says good luck and fortune is archaic, so no longer in use. So in American English, happiness became sort of the personal success and the satisfaction of one's desires and goals and things of that nature. So it has transformed, in a different direction over time, especially in the United States. But essentially the last 20, 30 years, the debate in the literature and the well-being, science of well-being is really, which one is more important? Is it the personal happiness or more of the eudaimonic well-being to make perhaps others happy, even at the expense of one's own happiness?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I think when the founders used the word happiness back in the 18th century, it was much closer to this, eudaimonia that the Greeks had. I mean, because they were schooled in the classics, right?
Sure,
and the Stoics, right? And so in some sense, it's kind of like we're revisiting the Stoic versus Epicurean debate in a very dumbed down version, right?
Right, that's right.
But even before we get to the third dimension, it seems like with those two dimensions, the point is that you can have too much of either, right? So it's not like we want to, you can always maximize both the happiness and the meaning, but if you push too hard on the happiness dimension, it might actually impair the meaning dimension and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a trade-off definitely between sort of the maximizing happiness versus maximizing the meaning. Because, sometimes you have to take care of yourself in order to help somebody else. It's like emergency flight situations, right? If you want to help your child, then you put the mask first and then, then help others. So obviously, I think if you just emphasize only, for instance, helping others, then maybe it becomes, like taking care of yourself might become a little bit difficult. Although in general, so at any given moment, there's a trade-off, right? If you have to make a decision right now, do I spend time for me or do I spend time for others? Then there's a trade-off between maximization of personal happiness versus making others happy. But over time, you have enough time to perhaps take care of yourself and take care of others. Indeed, if you look at the literature, at least within the United States, those people who say they have, pretty good sense of meaning in their lives, they're also very satisfied their lives and vice versa. However, the interesting twist here is that if we look beyond United States and compare Americans with Ghanaians and Ethiopians and things like that, then all of a sudden the picture looks very, very, very different. So, for instance, if you look at the famous Cantrell's life evaluation ladder and an average of the nation across 132 countries, for instance, then the biggest predictor of that, which country is essentially happiest, pretty much predicted by the GDP per capita. Correlation is like 0.83. It's very, very strong. But if you look at the meaning, so there was a 2007 Gallup data, questions about the meaning and purpose. Do you feel like you have important goals, purpose and the meaning in your life? Yes or no question. Majority of the African countries says yes, 97%, of the population. So if you just do the same analysis, just now replacing the life satisfaction with the meaning in life, correlation is minus 0.49. So obviously at the global level, right, some countries much easier to feel meaning, maybe through religions or communities, even though financially speaking and materially speaking, they're not, well off. So they might not feel like their life is quite close to the best possible, life. But at the same time, they could feel tremendous sense of meaning. And I understand why I'm here.
Right. Well, okay. So what's missing in that kind of two-part analysis, right? Why don't we need a third dimension? Is what's missing here?
Right. So it looked, I was very satisfied with these two dimensions, by the way, for the longest time. Just that as more data came in, I found it something odd that the predictors of the happy life and then the meaningful life tend to really emphasize stability of life and stability in terms of, personal relationships, relationship with your romantic partner, family, communities, but also like financial stabilities and so forth, especially important for the happy life. The meaningful life, it turned out that you have to sort of make a judgment, right? You have to pick one or two domain of life or social issues that you really care about.
Or you need a stable religious community or a stable marriage or a stable...
Right. A lot of people say that the marriage, religion gives me the sense of meaning, but also a lot of people try to make a difference in the world in whatever they could. So, they volunteer in the same church for extended period of time. And, Samantha Heinzelman found this really interesting things about the routines. The people who have routines tend to say that their life is more meaningful. And even experimentally, inducing some sort of routine structure, they feel that the activity is more meaningful because the sense of meaning in part comes from the sense of coherence. And we play many different roles and sometimes we feel fragmented. And when we feel fragmented, it is very hard to feel meaning. But when we have routines or structure in life, then it's much easier for you to feel like your life has a meaning. So these findings essentially questioned me, right? What about the opposite, right? Some people really don't like structure. Some people really don't like routines. Some people really like to explore the world and find something interesting, something new. So when you, for instance, look at the big 5 personality traits and which traits are correlated with the happy life and meaningful life, and actually one big part of the big 5 traits, openness to experience, is not really correlated with the happiness or a meaning either. So given that, right, a lot of personality psychologists think that there are 5 global traits because they are useful, they are functional. Maybe there's an evolutionary reason.
Well, in fact, some people might find, a lot of dissatisfaction in stability, right? They get
exactly.
Bored, they're restless.
Boredom. Exactly. So, if you think that everybody who is restless and going, very adventurous are not leading a good life, then that's fine, right? But if you think that those are also admirable lives, then that's the limitation to me of the happy life and the meaningful life, at least measured in the literature. So they are not capturing those, life of explorations, adventures, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in the business world, we talk about the trade-off between explore and exploit, right? And we say in order to be,
Exactly.
a successful corporation, you have to get that balance right. And, of course, it depends on the environment, it depends on the rate of change and so forth. And so I've always thought about that in the context of, my own life and how there is that trade-off and something as simple as, where do I go on vacation?
Sure.
Um, it's wonderful to go back to that same Airbnb,
Right.
the
Exactly.
same, arrondissement in Paris and,
Right.
revisit all of the old restaurants that I love to enjoy. But then it's also super cool to go to some country that I've never been to and have experiences
Exactly.
I've never had before. And if you do one, you're not doing the other, right? At
Right.
some level.
Exactly, exactly. And unfortunately, a lot of people have this familiarity bias, right? When we think about exotic vacation, oh, it sounds appealing. But when it comes to the decisions, people usually choose this familiar, oh, let's go to Paris. Let's go to this, our favorite place again, because we know it's a guaranteed gain, right? We have such a huge, this loss aversion that the chance of disaster, right? Going to a new country, a new place is so scary that so many people avoid that. But if you do that, obviously you're not really going beyond your comfort zone. You might not learn something new, right? If you're just going to the same place again and again. So it's great. It will increase and then maintain your happiness. But if you just go back to the same place, attracted to the familiar all the time, then perhaps you're not expanding your horizon, you're not learning anything new, and so forth.
Well, wait, I mean, is that a problem of hedonic forecasting or self-knowledge, right? Your colleague Nick Epley writes about this.
Sure.
I mean, are you saying that most people systematically underinvest in exploration? I mean, I say this about companies. It's systematic.
Yeah,
It's easier to, double down on the familiar. I mean,
I think, this is not my research. Looking at all kinds of cognitive bias literature, I think there's a huge familiarity bias. Bob Zients found this mere exposure effect in the 1960s. And essentially, we like familiar things, right? And also, loss aversion is a huge example. Endowment effect is the same thing. Once you own it, you think it's more valuable than the new thing, right? So I think all these things bias us toward the familiar and sure gain. And if you're trying to maximize happiness, that's great. That's the strategy you should take, actually. But that has downside, such as we said, just you don't learn anything new. Maybe your curiosity is not fully met, and you're not adventurous enough to discover something.
I think you also pointed out that when people are stressed, right,
Uh-huh.
they tend to gravitate much more to the familiar.
Exactly. So there's a famous study in developmental psychology, right? You bring the baby and mother to the laboratory, and then the baby explore the place, new toys and so forth. As soon as mother leaves, baby just panic and freeze and then just start crying and crying. And essentially the basic idea by the Bowlby is that you need the secure base in order for a baby to explore. So baby cling to the familiar thing, the teddy bears and, whatever familiar toy, right? Then it will soothe them. But unfortunately, that's our very, very foundational psychological tendency. So I did the study abroad. I was at a university in Tokyo, went to Maine explicitly because there aren't that many Japanese. And then what happened? Well, there are three other Japanese students, and I hung out with three other Japanese students. Why did I do that all the way going from Tokyo to Lewiston, Maine, right? It doesn't make sense. But the comfort, and then they understand what I'm, going through very stressful situations where language is new, I don't understand the customs, etc., etc. So yeah, exactly. When you are under stress, you don't explore. So.
Now, I think you also talked about specialists versus
Yeah,
generalists. And, when you're a specialist, I mean, this goes all the way back to, Marx, where he
exactly.
described, if you're
Exactly.
in a factory and you're just, doing the same, like, widget over and over and over again,
Exactly.
that this is going
Exactly.
to, lead to depression. But, there are like some, monks who will intentionally kind of do the same thing over and over and over again. And so, to what extent is that just an artifact of how you are interpreting the activity?
Yeah, no, no, no. I think that's a great, great example. In general, if you do the same thing again and again, boredom kicks in very, very quickly. So you're not really fully engaged. And then Marcus, says nicely that you are becoming just one-dimensional being, right? Just essentially machine, not the full human. Um, so I think there is that. When you just be specialized, you're not paying attention to other things. All you have to do is X, right? So there are many other consequences, such as when we give sort of the curiosity question, trivia questions, then specialists are not interested in the trivia answer at all. Whereas if you make them think like a generalist, then they're much more likely to be interested in these various other things like trivia questions. But going back to the monk, yes, monk's life is very rigid, right? They get up early. Usually Buddhist monks start with the cleaning because that's the, ritual that you clean up, you clean your mind, and then just go about your life. But I think the mindset of the monk is very, very different than the factory workers or even the professional specialist, right? The monk is really trying to live this spiritual life and then try to train them. So even those in the middle of the sweeping and cleaning, right? They think of that as a training. They're training their mind. They're training, just purifying their behaviors so that they can concentrate on the more important issue. And in the book, I talk about Jiro, the sushi master,
Right.
who essentially did exactly the same thing for 60 years. And then in the interview, right, Jiro Dreams of Sushi, that title, I think, came from this quote. Essentially, he says he hates holidays because I cannot, make sushi. I just can't wait the Monday comes, right? And that's really like, you can be doing almost exactly the same thing for so many extended period of time, but he is always thinking about how to improve, right? He's observing the customer's facial expressions. And I mean, he was massaging octopus for 30 minutes and then he already had the 3 Michelin stars, right? But then when he tried 45 minutes to see if that makes difference, actually the customers really loved it. So he changed it to the 45 minutes method. And then, a lot of fishes disappeared from Tokyo Bay. So he had to come up with a new recipe, new fish to try and so forth. So I think although he was doing sushi making, pretty much the same task for 60 years, he never got bored. He never got burned out. So I think, certain mindset and just a playfulness as well. I talk about playfulness. Jiro is tremendously playful person, right? Joke around with his co-workers and customers and so forth. So just sense of play and playfulness, I think, really helps. Because if you're just too serious, right? Some Michelin star chef end their lives because they feel too much pressure, too serious about their job. So I think there has to be some balance between, I want to improve myself, of course, but at the same time, it's a creativity, right? Just act how to do it. Maybe if I change this in my, make customer,
Well, okay. So,
piece
but
more.
and I think this is about finding novelty in the same thing, right? And
Right, that's right.
talked
That's
about
right.
that with marriage and how
Yeah.
you can continually discover new things within these constraints. But I mean, if people get bored easily and they are seeking out novelty, I mean, some people would say that this is a psychological disorder, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I mean, is it a disorder only if it is a mismatch with the demands of the world, right? Like, so if, if the only job available is, factory work and you need to sit in a desk and listen to your teacher all day and, you get bored. Oh, well, then you must have a disorder. I mean, take that same person, put them in a Montessori classroom and the disorder goes
Right.
away, right? So is it a disorder or is it just a personality difference?
Sure. So there are personality differences, right? There is a personality dimension called sensation seeking. Some people really need a lot of sensation very, very frequently, bungee jumping and then, snowboarding and all kinds of crazy things. Whereas others are perfectly happy with the book in the room. So definitely there are huge individual differences. And there's, as you said, the match between the environment and the person, right? The classroom sensation seekers not really gonna do well because they have to sit there for 45 minutes, cannot do the things they want to do and so forth. So yes, there's an element of that. But I think that one thing I want to emphasize here is that if you are a boredom-prone person, then obviously I think you have to do something new. But when you do something new, I think one thing you can change here is that the reflection. I think what sensation seekers do not tend to do is that just after having this adventure, sit down, reflect upon, and just sort of savor their experiences. So if you do that, I think the boredom, at least the frequency of the boredom, will be reduced.
Yeah, but I think you used, when you talk about sensation seeking, I think you made a distinction between sensation seeking and the pursuit of psychological richness, right? I mean, sensation seeking is sort of a superficial version of the pursuit of psychological richness. Is it because it's too shallow?
Yeah, I don't think it's a shallowness issue. I think it is really just the sensation seeker. Essentially, it's a deprivation issue. Like when they experience some sensation, they go back to the baseline, and then afterward, they're deprived, so they need to bring back.
So it's like an addiction almost.
Yeah, almost addiction.
Yeah.
On the other hand, my concept of psychological richness is putting this one experience and adding them up, accumulating. So just like a materially rich person has a lot of assets in the bank or whatever, right, investment portfolio. Here we're talking about psychological richness. So interesting experiences, stories, adding up. And I think what the sensation seekers do not do as well is sort of reflect and try to put it and accumulate. Because they just go and experience and then feel like, okay, I need to do it again. I need to do it again.
Well, I mean, is psychological richness related to the concept of balance or, well-roundedness, right? I mean, I tend to think that if I, start falling behind on my knowledge in a particular domain, I say, wait, I got to stop, I got to stop going into depth on this AI stuff. And I need to go back and, I haven't read any literary fiction in the last month. I got to go read a novel. So I tend to think of it in terms of, making sure that I don't get too pointy. I want to stay. And if I have divots, I want to kind of fill in those divots.
Yeah. So I think that psychological richness comes from the diverse experiences. So obviously, if you have divergent interest and then balance in these divergent interests and activities, I think that will definitely increase the richness as opposed to just going one deep dive. Yeah.
Right. Now, if we're trying to figure out sort of, again, because you could go too far in this dimension. And so what would be the determinants of what the optimal amount of psychological richness is?
Yeah. So I think you could definitely pursue psychological richness too much, right? I mean, some people may think, oh, I have to do something new every moment, every day, right? But as I said, unless you can just reflect upon and add it up in your sort of the psychological memorabilia or portfolio, it is not really adding up, right? So essentially, unless you can just reflect upon and remember these experiences, it doesn't work that well. So I think that too much richness is the situations where, given a short period of time, you experience too much that you cannot really process and remember, right? I mean, when I was in college in Tokyo, I didn't have that much money. So whenever there is like triple show of, old movies, I would go there, right? And then you pay like 1,000 yen, like $10, and you can watch 3 movies. But what happens is, like next day, it's like, okay, which movie was which? You don't remember. So I think that there is such thing as too much psychological richness.
Now, I think you also talked about play and humor, and I think this is kind of related to perspective taking. So I think the psychological richness is about perhaps looking at the same phenomenon from multiple angles, the serious and the humorous. And I mean, is there some kind of way in which we in psychology measure the capacity to engage in perspective taking? And is that correlated in some way with this dimension?
Yeah, that's interesting. We haven't really tested. I think that, Adam Galinsky and various others have done lots of work on the perspective taking, and especially in the stereotype prejudice situations, like being able to take, right, this perspective of the target and stigmatized group is really important, not to, dehumanize and so forth. So there's a measure, and we haven't tested that idea. But we do know that when we ask, participants to reflect upon the best event happened to you and the worst event happened to you over the last week, right? And compare that with another conditions. Think about the best event that happened to you and then the second best event that happened to you. And then we ask perspective change questions. How much these experiences change the way you view the world, that change the way you view about yourself? Then the best and the worst event condition, people are much more likely to say, yeah, actually, I changed the way I think about the world, think about myself. So definitely the perspective change is a really important part, crucial part of the psychological richness.
Yeah, and I think novelty seeking is something that can be done from your bedroom. I read a lot of novels, and I listen to on audio a lot of memoirs, or read a lot of memoirs. And the thing that attracts me to them is that it enables me to view the world from a completely different perspective. Like, what would it be like to be a Michelin chef? Well, I can read Jean Georges' book, right, or Eric Rieper's book. What would it be like to be a medieval peasant? Well, I can read a novel about that, right? I mean, So I mean,
definitely.
Is there some relationship between this novelty seeking and one's, I don't know, appreciation of literature and aesthetic experience?
So we have a study about reading habit. Like growing up, what kind of books did you read? And essentially what we found is that those people who say, I read a lot of short stories or literature, literary fictions, as adult, first of all, they are much more likely to have this more complex attributional processes. So when they see somebody's behavior, they can come up with multiple reasons why this person might have done this. Whereas those people who grew up reading like romance novel, they tend to stereotype, so they tend to come up with just a singular explanation. And more attributionally complex people are, the psychologically rich they say they are as adult. So definitely these, just exposure to the literary world of complex internal world definitely seems to be correlated with psychological richness. So you don't essentially have to experience these things, firsthand. If you read novel, if you watch documentaries or films and so forth, and really immersed in this, world, then I think you do live multiple lives. Indeed, this bookstore owner in Morocco said he read 4,000 books. So I lived 4,000 lives. And, that exactly sort of captures this power of this vicarious experiences.
And I think it's what you're describing is it's related to how we think about curiosity, right? So I've done some podcasts, and there appear to be these different types of curiosity. So, somebody who, and sometimes I'll find myself, an hour goes by, I'm looking at Facebook Reels or something, and I'm like, what the heck did I just do for an hour? Like, it's so stupid. But in a way, that's tapping into a desire for, novelty and curiosity, but it's very different from, say, spending an hour reading literary fiction. I mean, to what extent is this just, John Stuart Mill's pushpin versus poetry, right?
Yeah. No, I think that the curiosity, in one sense, is more of the going deep and being absorbed, right? And the other one is sort of the stretching. You're just curious to know something new. And we looked at the both dimensions of curiosity and how it's related to happiness, meaning, and psychological richness. And clearly, both dimensions of curiosity are most strongly correlated with psychological richness. So if you do live with curiosity, essentially driven by your own curiosity, rather than sort of the checklist of things to do, and you have to get things done, these things every day kind of mindset, obviously you encounter, right, something unexpected if your life is driven by curiosity as opposed to the what to do. So, sorry. Yeah.
Well, you also talk about kind of do it yourself. I mean, I cook every night, and
oh, great.
And I I have people saying, like, what are you doing? Like, I mean, your opportunity cost of time is,
right.
You could be making $1,000 an hour going and, consulting, and here you are, you're going to the supermarket and you're cooking and you're cleaning. Like, this is nuts, right? And we all spend maybe some weekends working around the house and so forth. And it would make a lot more sense to outsource that. And yet, it does provide some satisfaction, right?
Sure.
But is that irrational?
I think it's irrational if you're trying to maximize profit, right, or earning. So definitely, I can see other economists saying, "Well, this is total waste of time because just you're doing poor job."
It tells you the kind of friends I have.
Right? Yeah. I'm sure economists do that. But at the same time, if you switch the dependent variable or ultimate, outcome variable from the earning or profit to your experience, then obviously cooking yourself, right, gives you tremendous sense of accomplishment and joy and some discovery. You can experiment, you can try this one and that one. And I think you can feel the sense of control over whole production, right? So, I think, compared to just ordering takeout and things like that, of course, that will, get the job done. But psychologically speaking, it is not going to be as satisfying as successful version of the cooking or successful version of the DIY.
Well, I mean, are employment opportunities sort of almost designed to make it more difficult for us to achieve this state of psychological richness? I mean, are we going to necessarily take some kind of, financial hit if we, pursue this? Because it does seem like in many disciplines, specialists are rewarded far better than generalists. People who are, drilling in very deeply are going to be rewarded. I mean, does the modern world make it more difficult? I mean, in some sense, the modern world makes it easier for us to pursue a life of psychological richness, but in other ways, it kind of makes it harder.
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of the time, if you have enough time, leisure time for yourself, then I think, everything works out fine. Specialization, make it efficient, work hours shorter, and so forth. Then that is great because time is precious in order for our happiness, meaning, and all, psychological richness, all three dimensions of life. But at the same time, if you have to spend a lot of time at work, then I think on average, being the generalist or doing a lot of different things, new challenge and so forth, gives you way more opportunities to enjoy, I think, your psychological richness. So modern world, I think, if you have to work 40 hours a week or more in a very specialized world, and then I would say that is tough for psychological richness.
Right. So perhaps as employers, we could design workplaces that give people an opportunity to explore a bit more. Even so as simple as having, I taught a course on the workplace, and you could design your buildings so that people can just, work in different environments, and,
Sure.
you have some, the space is changing in some ways, and so forth, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really important. That even if you do exactly the same thing, if you get to work in the office for 2 hours, go to the cafeteria, go to another part of the buildings or something like that to switch up, change up, I think that really, really helps. And also, I think in an organization, like early on when you are young, I think you get rotations and do a lot of different kinds of divisions and so forth before you are really specialized. But even after specialized, I think if you get some kind of rotation occasionally, or try out something different here and there, some kind of like sabbatical, but not exactly 1 year sabbatical, but like 1 week sabbatical, and you just like go to the different divisions and see how the work is looking like. I think those things really refresh them and then give them sort of the new perspective, and maybe give them even the understanding of what they are doing is how it's connected to the other divisions and so forth, and sort of the sense of, connection between what you do and the whole organization is really important, especially in terms of meaning in your job. Right. So in a specialized sort of large organization, I think it's very difficult to find your meaning in your job, because your job often is replaceable, even replaceable by AI and so forth. So it is kind of hard to find the meaning or point. But I think once you start seeing other divisions and how what you do day to day is used or helping or something like that, then I think it's really, really helpful.
Now, you quote Pascal, right, who said,
Yep.
you see all these busybodies running around, keeping themselves busy, and all they're doing is engaging in these, in divertissement, right? They're just trying to distract themselves from the important issues of life, right? And I think, someone else said, who was it, that all the world's troubles stem from people's inability to sit in a room, by themselves. Pascal said, that's Pascal also, right?
There will be no war if the man can sit quietly in their own quarter.
Yeah. So, that seems to be a critique of the pursuit of psychological richness. Is he simply saying that there's a trade-off between that and meaning, or is something deeper, do you think?
Yeah, I think Pascal's point is the boredom, that the people get so bored with themselves, therefore they feel like they have to do something, and oftentimes the war is the outcome of, we need to do something, right? Because they are so bored.
But I think it's more than boredom. He's talking about fear of death and fear of and despair, right?
Yeah. So, but I think I agree with Pascal in a sense that we can create our own richness internally with books and appreciation of the nature and observing something different, even from your bedrooms or office. right? You don't really have to go out and do all kinds of crazy things to have truly psychologically rich life. Marcel Proust was a very sick person. He lived in his essentially bedrooms, writing. But he says so, right? I mean, just pick up the good book within the matter of hour or two. You can go and experience somebody's entire life with the up and down and unbelievable event, which in the real life, if you live that, it will take 10 years, 20 years, even the lifetime to experience that. So through a book, you can experience that kind of stuff very, very quickly. And that's why the art is so wonderful. The literature from the 18th century, 16th century, we can still read and enjoy, and actually we feel very, very close to the persons you're reading about from hundreds and thousands of years ago. So we have this ability, amazing brain and imagination. So certainly, I think Pascal will agree that it is possible to have psychologically rich life without actually going out there and war and killing and doing all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, I think Flaubert said, I have a very boring life so that I can be a great artist, right? So.
Wow. He didn't have a boring life, right? I mean, he was canceled, lawsuit.
But you also talk about the stories that we tell ourselves. And so this also seems to suggest that, the psychological richness comes not just from the objective experiences that we have, that we, can say, oh, I went here and I did this, but really the narrative that we tell. And, are we telling a story of progress and advancement? Are we telling a story of that describes a rich life? So is there a way that we can, intervene in our self-conception that will make our lives richer?
Yeah, I think that the way we think about our struggles and challenge and the setbacks, and sometimes we want to forget about these things and then just have a different version of ourselves. But in terms of psychological richness, actually setbacks and some tragedies and so forth are the great sources and the backbone of the great stories and psychological richness, because it is all about what you learned and what you experienced and what you didn't know before, and now you know. So I think those are the good stories, as opposed to I did this, I did that, and I did that. Those are not great stories. So you can experience exactly the same events, but if you have this mindset of, how can I, think about my experience and what did I learn, and then I think you can make it more interesting story, but also more memorable personally, so that you can really store in your psychological memorabilia.
So adversity can itself be a source of richness.
Right. I mean, it is very difficult, right? I mean, I'm from Japan, where there are lots of earthquakes. I spent my sabbatical in Kobe in 2012 and 2013 because I really wanted to understand the recovery from the 1995 earthquake. And when I discovered this, regional surveys, the regionally representative samples of, the earthquake victims, and essentially 16 years afterwards, they were still less happy than the Kobe residents whose house did not, get destroyed. So there are lots of long-term negative consequences of, earthquakes and the tsunami and things like that. But at the same time, if you look at the different kinds of data, the job application data, for instance, then you realize that the people's value seems to have changed to more pro-social dimensions. And when we ask the value orientation too, and the earthquake experiencers tend to emphasize power or achievement less than just a typical Japanese who have not really experienced huge earthquake and devastation before. So I think that the value changed, and then they've discovered something new after this disaster and the tragedy. And I don't want to say the tragedy is great, because some people do, end their lives and so forth. And then many people struggle for a long period of time. But for the majority of people, people are very, very resilient. So I think some of the adversities are the opportunities to, discover something new about your neighbors, about your communities, and about yourself, and growing opportunities and opportunities to enhance your richness.
Well, you mentioned earlier some studies that looked at the distribution of happiness and meaning across different cultures and societies, and looked for predictors like, income per capita and so forth. Do we have any good information on the degree to which people have psychological richness across cultures and across income groups and so forth?
Yeah, we don't have very good measure. There's one items about the, like, did you learn something new and interesting yesterday? Yes or no question. But otherwise, we don't have a very, very good, like, a large scale measure. Our self-report measure, some are nationally representative sample, and we look at the socioeconomic status, then there is a positive correlation, but the correlation is not super high, 0.15 to 0.20. And when we look at the socioeconomic status and the happiness or life satisfaction correlation, that correlation is a lot higher, 0.2 to 0.3. Meaning is the smallest in terms of the SES and yeah.
So is there anything that we as parents or teachers can do to help people cultivate their capacity for psychological richness? In the growth mindset literature, there's a lot of discussion about, as a parent, you can ask your kids at the dinner table, like, what did you learn today? Or, what did you do wrong today? Or something like that. And when I think of my job as an educator, I don't think of myself as someone whose job it is to teach discounted cash flow. I tend to think I'm helping people to grow their character and their capabilities and so forth. What can we do as parents and teachers?
Yeah, I think the one thing is that you can, embrace some negative events. The stuff happened to everybody, good people. And when you have the mindset that, some setback, that's no problem. You can learn something new from it. It's not devastating, right? Happiness, when you think of happiness as a success, personal success, then that's really setback. It's unhappiness, failure, really bad rumination cycle. So I want to say, that's okay to have failure here and there, and then all we have to do is just think about what we learned, and maybe that actually becomes interesting stories and enrich your life. So I think we have a lot of things we can teach and help kids to live more resiliently and without much anxiety.
Well, Shige, thank you so much for joining me. This is a fantastic life in 3 dimensions. And now I'll be much more conscious of the different dimensions operating simultaneously. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.